Hey there, welcome to the Aspect Podcast Network, the home of Bending the Narrative. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button below and be the first to listen to our new episodes and other shows from the Aspect, covering topics such as Marvel, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and more. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bending the Narrative here on the Aspect Network. I'm one of your hosts, Kate Kroonquist, and joining me every week to discuss the latest and greatest in the world of Avatar is Alex Batts. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. We've got another incredible episode this week. So we're continuing our book 2 rewatch with the episode Zuko Alone.
Now let's continue tracking Team Avatar and Zuko's separate journeys on our handy dandy little world map here.
Yeah, so we just have Zuko this episode. It's a Zuko-centric one. We don't have to worry about the gang. He said, get these other clowns out of here.
Get these other clowns out of here. Let's see my boy.
So yeah, we're just with Zuko. He's a little bit north of where we last left the gang last week. So he's kind of like at the edges. He's actually at the edges of the Siwang Desert. And there's a little village. I can't even tell what the name of that village is. Not even going to try. Relanes? I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
He's in a small little village. He's there, and then we also do get some flashbacks like throughout the episode. So also technically in the Fire Nation, but you know, those are the like rose.
Those are flashbacks. Yeah.
The flashbacks.
Our gang isn't currently there.
Yeah, so we're just with Zuko this episode, just in this little village in the Earth Kingdom, the edge of the desert, and he's just, travel. As the title suggests, he's just traveling on his lonesome.
Alone.
He's just making making his way through the world. So Book 2, Episode 7 is directed by Lauren McMullen and written by Elizabeth Welch Hazaz. And if you're just joining us, we will be discussing the show in its totality. So, of course, be warned about spoilers. So for this episode, let's see how this one's a lot. There's a lot that happens in this for me to get through, and
there's at the end of this episode, I was like, oh, a lot happened.
So many plot points in this, actually.
Yes.
So again, like last week, we get a previously on Avatar thing for here. They highlight Zuko being burned by Ozai. They highlight him leaving Iroh, and they also put the emphasis on his differences with Azula, and that they have like led very different lives. So that's setting up the episode, and then it opens with big Western vibes as Zuko is traveling through the harsh lands of the Earth Kingdom. He gets into this village and deals with some random Earth Kingdom soldiers who, it was so funny to me in my notes as I was writing this, like as he was having the interaction, I was like, Earth Kingdom soldiers who are basically thugs. And as I typed basically thugs, the dude in the show was like, but they're little more than thugs. And I was like, oh, nice. Like, cool.
Okay, I'm on the right track.
So he deals with them. This one kid helps Zuko out because Zuko did not snitch on him for throwing the eggs at the soldiers. And this kid, who we learn is named Lee, I believe, takes Zuko back to his family to feed his ostrich horse, which is ironically not Zuko's technically because he stole it, but whatever.
Whatever. We love it.
So Zuko gets brought to the family, and this is when we start getting our flashbacks to Zuko and his mother and teaching him a lesson about being kind and that mothers will always look after their children and stuff like that. We also
see turtle ducks.
Yeah, we see the turtle ducks, which are
they come back a lot.
Cool design. They're also adorable. I love them.
Yeah.
Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee are also in the flashbacks. We see Azula and Zuko never getting along as siblings and as kids. They just are not having a good time. We also get Azula manipulating people just straight from the beginning. Like she is just always manipulating everyone to get what she wants.
She really was born that way. My God.
So like that's a big thing that they make sure to emphasize. We also, to place us in time here, like obviously we know that Azula and Zuko are children at this point. But we also have Iroh riding in from the warfront at Ba Sing Se and sending gifts. So he sends Zuko a gift, this dagger that has on it engraved, "Never give up without a fight." We also learned that their dad is not the Fire Lord yet. That is Azulon, who is Azula's namesake and grandfather, is the current Fire Lord, and Iroh is next in line because he is Ozai's older brother. So establishing a lot of like internal Fire Nation succession and like ranks and things happening there.
Love, yeah.
There's so much.
It's so cool though. whole royal family drama and
I
lore. Love
always
it all.
will eat up royal family succession, like back all it's all so good. So we get that, we cut back to the present, and we have this kid Lee stealing Zuko's blades to mess around with them, and then Zuko's response to this is actually pretty great. He's super chill about it and is just like tries to give him some pointers and like help him out. It's a really wholesome moment, honestly. So we get that, and then the next day, the Earth Kingdom soldiers show up to tell the family that the father's son's battalion was lost in the fighting, and so like they don't know what's happening with his son. We then, at the same time as this, get a flashback to Zuko and his mother and Azula getting writing from Iroh that Iroh's son has died in the fighting at Ba Sing Se, and then Iroh immediately abandons the siege. We then also there's a lot of like intercutting of the past and present in this episode because they very much like hinge on like an emotional thing happening in the present that coincides with the past and back
It's
and forth.
great. I love the way they wrote this.
It's really, really strong storytelling. So we get that. We get Zuko giving this little kid Lee his knife and telling him to like look at the inscription, which is also really funny that at first he's like made in Ba Sing Se, and he's like the other one, which is just such a good bit. Like it's great. So we get that. We also then in the past get Zuko and Azula and Ozai like in front of Azulon, and I don't know, like it's not necessarily like a council meeting or anything like that, but they're just kind of like presenting stuff to him or like showing off what they can
how
do.
Are my kids doing? How is the royal
Yeah,
family
like it's
doing?
like
Are they learning?
It's a super formal check-in demonstration thing. Yeah, like what have you guys been up to? And so we see one Azula being absolutely ruthless as a child and understanding war and strategy, and also clearly being Ozai's favorite, and also very much being a prodigy. And then we get to see Zuko bumbling around and not doing things successfully. Like one, not answering the questions like appropriately, not being able to firebend as well as Azula. So we get all of that, and then Azulon dismisses everyone and is like, Ozai, tell me what you actually want. And Ozai's like, hey, you should revoke Iroh's birthright because his lineage is done now because his son just died. Like, clearly you need... He's making his play for power, essentially. And Azulon gets pissed. He's like, you want me to take away, like, hit your older brother's birthright, like, after he just suffered this grievous loss? Like, get lost, basically. Which is super interesting.
Too important. He's like, you should know the pain of having a son taken away.
Yeah. Which is a very... Yeah. Well, because Azula... Does he? I don't think he says that in the same... Azula says
Azula says that he says that.
Yeah, like to mess with Zuko later on. She's like... He said that Ozai should know the pain that Iroh just went through. But yeah, so we get that. And then we get back to the present where the Lee ends up getting taken by the Earth soldiers because he pulled a knife on them, and the mom's like, I don't even know where he got a knife. Zuko did. So that's a bit messy. And so we then flash back to Zuko's mother, or no, before that, we get Zuko going to the soldiers and fighting them, and like he's wrecking them all just with normal fighting, and because he's trying not to bend with the swords. Yeah, like he's just using
swords against rocks. That's insane.
Oh, it's honestly, again, like last week, it's a really cool fight sequence. They did some awesome stuff here. So we get that, and then we get him like trying to win the fight without bending. We then flash back to Zuko's mother saying to never forget who he is, and that all she's done to protect him. This is the last scene we get with his mother, because she just disappears after this, which is wild. So we get that. We get Azula also ends up like taunting him. We cut back to the present, and Zuko's using his bending to win, which reveals his identity. He then also, besides even just being like, I'm a bender, he's like, I'm the prince. Then like he's
like, by the way,
I'm like, dude, you didn't need to
do that.
Out yourself like that. You could have just been like a normal firebender, and it would have probably been a little bit easier on everyone. But whatever.
Yeah.
So it reveals his full identity, saves them. But this, of course, causes everyone around him to hate him because the Fire Nation is the reason there's a problem in the first place. And so there's all of that. And in the past, Zuko's mom just disappears and their grandpa, Azula, dies in the same night. So coincidence? I think not.
I think not.
So that's a big thing, though. And Azula is, playing mind games with Zuko and being shitty, as she generally is. Honestly, like that's the best way to sum that up. And then we cut to the like royal burial, not burial, but like the in memoriam ceremony, whatever you want to call it. I'm blanking on the name that these
His
things.
funeral, I
His
guess.
funeral, wake, whatever you want to call it.
Funeral wake, yeah.
Which also, though, their white ceremonial robes are so
Mm.
sick. I love that they had those, and they look awesome. They're
I do
very
love that
cool.
they do that. I think that is in the culture too as well. There's I know Indian culture does that a lot, where you wear white to a funeral.
That's awesome. I love that. It looks great, and also just a very nice like visual contrast. So they get that, and it is said that Azulon's dying wish is for Ozai to succeed him, which we'll get into it. But I feel like all of this is very not accurate.
Very not accurate. Somebody's lying here.
Yeah, and then we cut back to the present with Zuko leaving the town, and it mirrors the start of the episode with him like walking away. We just have the shot from behind him now, as opposed to the like shot of him walking towards the camera. So I do like the mirror that we get with the bookends on both of on this episode with the intro and the ending. I think it's really nice. So yeah, that's all this stuff. Again, a lot of like back and forth cutting. They do a great job of
There's
like
basically two separate stories going on.
yeah, and then they just are able to tie them emotionally together at the appropriate beats. But Kate, we'll start with you. What are you? I know that you really like this episode. Zuko is your favorite. So, like, what are your thoughts on this episode? Why is this one of your favorites?
Where do I even begin? Well, first of all, obviously Zuko, my childhood crush. Love him. This is his best episode. We get some of, I think, their strongest writing in the whole series in this episode. This is, I think, the writing team's biggest flex, and they use all of their muscles in this episode. I think it's so genius. Like we were just talking about, the way that we learn so much in such a short period of time. We learn the lore of the royal family, which is always so interesting. We learn so much about Zuko. This is where I think the episode that really solidifies that Zuko's a main character and that he is a redemption arc and that we actually like him. It's not just like, oh, he could be a good guy. It's like, no, he's going to be. He is a good guy. It's there. And we will get there.
Yeah.
You sympathize for him completely with this episode. You can't help but fall in love with Zuko in this episode and feel for him. We get such great fighting, such great action.
Yeah.
Just like the last episode where we met Toph and her fighting. This is some of the best animation we've seen in the whole show. There's a lot of, and this is too in the last episode as well. I'm starting to see a lot of, I don't know if it's rotoscoping or sometimes with the fights, they'll actually just draw over them, like the actual people that they were filming doing these fights, like that they're basing it off of.
Yeah.
I think I see a lot of that here with the action and the way they move. It's very, very interesting.
You can tell they're getting more confident and more like they're finding, not that the visual language wasn't always there, but again, like with the character writing and the tone of the show, like they're getting more in stride with understanding like what they want to deliver and how to deliver it. I think like they're really understanding how to make every part of it more impactful and polished
and strong.
Like it's just, it really gets that. Yeah, to your point about Zuko and like seeing that he is good. Like this is like we got hints of it in the storm episode when we see him be burned, and like, because anytime you go into Zuko's past and then the further back into his past you go, you see more of his character at his core and like who he is as a person, and like you can see it.
Yes, that is the best way to put it. Yeah,
like you can see it in like fractures of how he acts in the present, like even in book one and the beginning of this book, and the fact that like there's that tension of goodness in him, like that's always bumping up against the like I need to be the ruthless Fire Nation person, right? But when you go far enough back, you see him as a child, and you can see that like even though this scene, like this episode, the flashback one opens up with him being kind of like mean, he very quickly learns from that, but then also you can just see that like he is just a good-hearted person. Like you can tell that he's
Mhm.
not, and it helps that you put him in contrast with Azula, who is just
Which is
ruthless.
straight up evil,
Yeah,
which I
from
do
like
love. I feel like there is this theme to it where everybody's like, oh, we always want villains who have a
not
backstory and we
purely
can
evil,
understand them. But it's kind of good to also, we
just
were
have a
talking about
villain.
this in a previous episode, to not,
Yeah,
yeah, to have just a villain for
yeah, like
villain's
it's
sake.
okay to do that. They can
It's
there
okay to
can
do
be
that. It
bad.
is.
Some people
There can
are
be
bad
bad
people,
people. Some
actually.
people are
Like
bad
not
people.
yeah, not everyone
I'm
at their
saying.
core is secretly a good person who's fighting against their bad instincts. Like some people are actually just bad.
Mhm. But I
Um
do love that Zuko does have a conscience, and we see it at work here. And in the little things, he won't fight the guy for food because he sees that his wife is pregnant.
mhm,
He helps the kid out.
mhm.
What else?
Yeah,
He
he
does
does.
like other small little things in this episode. He helps out, like he goes to feed his ostrich horse before he feeds himself.
Mhm. Him like refusing to, he doesn't respond to Lee in anger when he's stolen his
Mm.
swords, which is something that maybe book one Zuko would have, I think book one Zuko definitely would have
Oh
been
yeah.
like
Oh
furious
yeah.
about that. But it's the fact that his I need to be this mean evil person, like that idea slipping away and getting more to
Mm.
the core of who he actually is, like coming through and being like, no, I'm not, it's not something that I think he's definitely not consciously thinking like, oh, I need to be a good person or a better person. It's just him letting his natural inclinations take over and be more, and like accepting those more and more,
Mhm.
and like
That's okay.
understanding
And
that.
he doesn't have to be this fearless Fire Nation prince. This, like, it's that dynamic of who he's forced to be versus who he truly is,
Yeah.
or who he feels he needs to be.
Hmm.
It's really at play here. I also love too how this episode is like a Western, or
Oh yeah.
it's like those typical samurai stories. I think too, they said that the movie it mirrors this movie Yojimbo from 1961, but I
Okay.
haven't seen it, so I can't verify. That's what
Yeah.
people have said, which is, it mirrors that classic lone samurai story, or the lone Ronin, and
Hmm.
the like silent journey
Oh,
that
well,
they're
100.
on,
Yeah.
and
Like,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, that's
hat
an
and
even,
everything.
that's a better example. I mean, I know I said Western to start, but like Westerns drew a lot, obviously, like from
From
the
samurai.
samurai, yeah, the samurai films. Yeah, it's that, it is exactly that. It's that like lone, and also not, anti-hero is not necessarily the right word for it, but that like kind of on their own going into a town, like sort
Mm.
of making things worse a little bit, but doing what they can to help still in the process, and then like still being alone at the end and like leaving and
Mhm.
going to the next one. Like it's that very like insulated and just kind of lone wolf story, um, that he really embodies here.
And I like that they were able to do that in the show, and that because that's something really only adults understand, I feel, or when you grow older, that's only something you're like, this is, they're pulling from old tropes from
Hmm.
the beginning of cinema. And it's like,
Right.
this is a kid show in 2008.
Right. And it's, I mean, it's
No
cool
kid's
because
going to know that this mirrors Yojimbo from 1961.
yeah, but it's just one of those things too, where it's like when you look at the things that worked and understand why those things worked, and like are able to take those and then like retrofit it and apply it to the story that you're telling now, and it's like, well, there's a reason that it's so good. Those things were really good, like for fundamental like narrative reasons, and it's
Mhm.
understanding those and using those and applying those to the characters that you then have for your own thing, and making them work in that way, which I think is, really important and a big key to a lot of, honestly, the success of this show. Um, but yeah, it's fantastic stuff seeing him
So
like
beautiful.
evolving and like evolving in the fact that like he's evolving by getting more to his roots. Like it's not that he's
Yes.
necessarily like he's it feels weird to call it a regression because like it feels like
Yeah.
progression, but it is kind of like regressing back to like who he
His
actually
childhood
is.
self.
Yeah,
Mhm. And
which I
like,
think.
I feel like that is a big thing with his character. He's still this little boy, but he's confused and he's lost, and uh, he's just, I just love him.
I
He's so
also think
good.
it's super interesting. I know we talked for like 10 minutes about names last week. We don't get his mom's name in this,
Yes, you're right. We don't.
which is wild.
We don't ever get it. We don't ever get his mom's name. No,
I do
we
believe
do.
in the comic, which I have not read
Well, in the
yet.
comic, we do. The
Yeah,
comic is
but
really good. It
yeah,
explains too what happened
yeah,
during,
yeah,
because we don't ever find out in the show.
not in the show
Right? No, not in the show. What happens
to his mom.
to his mom why she leaves. No, we
Which
figure out why she leaves, right? No, that's in the comic.
yeah, and we don't find out anything in the show. It was like one of the
Yeah.
like the biggest like questions. Everyone was like, what
What happened
happened
to
here?
his mom?
Because like
Yeah.
as I was hinting at in the like quick recap thing, it feels very clear that Ozai just straight up kills his father and is like,
Yeah.
and usurps the throne from Iroh and is like, I'm in charge now. Like that's what's happening. That definitely feels like the implied reading of this episode and the things that go down, which is super interesting and also just showing how like ruthless he is. And again, I like that the show just treats him like a movie monster. We still don't see his face in the entire episode.
Yes,
You
but
don't
we do
see
hear. This isn't the first time we hear Mark Hamill's voice, right? No, we've heard it before.
He was in the storm. He did have a couple
In the storm.
lines
That's
in this
right.
one.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, we do get Mark Hamill again, which is nice. And you see his like chin. You see from like here down in the shot because it's like show because they're all kneeled and the camera is focused at like Zuko and Asula head level, so it's going to be like lower than him. But yeah, we don't see.
You never see his face.
You don't see his face. They straight up treat him like a movie monster, where you like gotta save that reveal for later. Like we just don't see him yet, which is wild. You have a whole like you have multiple scenes with him in this, and he's still just not ever present, like not shown.
Yeah, he's never present. And also, I feel like that rings true for like we're seeing this from Zuko's perspective. His father was never really present. I don't know if he really ever was seeing his father. So I feel like that puts us in Zuko's shoes.
I don't know because I was trying to think about it some, and I don't know exactly where. Like how to make the arguments on either side, but I feel like there's definitely some nature versus nurture stuff with both Zuko and Azula, and one, they're just natural inclinations, and then also the differences in like Zuko being a mama's boy and Azula being a daddy's girl, and how like each of them focus on like there's
like mommy issues versus daddy issues.
Yeah, like there's a lot there on both in the like who they're nurtured by and also how they naturally are anyways. Like there's just so much like it's such a messy thing, honestly. Like
it's daddy issues, or it's like daddy issues make you sad, mommy issues make you a psycho, and it's like Zuko and Azula.
Yeah, it's but it is, they just do such a good job of showing the contrast between the two of them and like how vastly
been that way from the start.
Yeah, and how vastly different their experiences were even within the same household, and how that shapes them both as they grow. I was going to say into adults, but they're not adults in this show. They're teenagers still.
Or into grown to current day. We can just say to current
day.
But I also love too, like we do see Azula's craziness already. We see her the manipulating Ty Lee and May and to make fun of her and her crush on Zuko.
And even her mom, like she's like to get Zuko to play with them. She's like, isn't it important for siblings to play together and stuff? And she's like, yeah, you're right, Azula. And it's just so Azula can play a prank on all of them, essentially, like so that she can laugh.
Scary.
Like, it's so bad. I always want to pronounce May as Mai because of this.
Yeah.
Literally every time I see it written down, I'm like, I have to fight myself. I'm like, nope, it's just May.
I do the same with Toph. I want to say Toph. And I'm like,
I really? I've never. That's interesting.
You're like, well, I never done that.
I'm just better, I guess. It's just
You're like, wow, that sucks.
Couldn't be.
Couldn't be me.
Yeah, I do think it's cool though that we see like the four of them as kids and all like interacting and hanging out and knowing that was a thing. And again, like we were talking about last week with them like planting seeds and planting future stuff. Like we knew that there was like a thing between May and Zuko because of how she acted in. I'm forgetting the episode title, but whenever it was the three of them, it was like two.
They kidnapped Omashu, something.
Return to Omashu. Yep. But we knew there was something there because of that. But I do like that they like further build upon that by like establishing,
or like solidify. Like that was a little thing that happened.
Yeah, that was part of their childhood. So that's super important because that'll also be a real big thing by the time we get to the end of the show.
Yes, it will.
It's super crucial. So again, just like reinforcing these things that they've established and like building upon them and doing it in a really like natural way that also is like not even a super like, hey, look at, like, that's not at all the focus of this episode. Like, it's not even, it's like
Mhm.
maybe like the fifth or sixth most important thing, right? But like narratively, but it's still something that they take the time to put in there
Like it
because
grounds the characters, I feel, makes them more realistic, and I think it's a good way to connect them all and show like, oh, their relationships are all intertwined and
mhm,
how they're all connected.
yeah.
But we will come back. We're going to dive actually more into this and about the narrative in the episode and how it contributes to the overall narrative. I can't speak, sorry. But we will be right back.
Hey, Aspect listener, I'm Robbie.
And I'm Alex, enjoying the show here on the Aspect Network.
Then check out Framing the Force.
We are your one-stop shop for all things in a galaxy far, far away. Each week, we discuss everything from the latest news and releases to the hottest topics in the fandom.
Beyond the films and series, we share our thoughts on every corner of the Star Wars universe, from comics to video games to collectibles and everything in between.
Join us every week as we discuss one of the greatest franchises in film history here on the Aspect Network.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Bending the Narrative. Before the break, we broke down the episode Zuko Alone, and now we're discussing how this episode contributes to the overall series and story in the world of Avatar. Kate, let's start with you. How does this episode play into the larger story?
Well, first of all, we learn about the history around our main villain, around
Yes.
Ozai. We learn about the royal family,
Mhm.
the main evil
Antagonist.
force of the show, the main antagonist. Thank you. That's the word for it. that's the smart
Main
word.
bad guy.
Main bad guy. So I love learning about this royal family. It's very interesting, and it shows a lot about. It gives us a lot of information, a good peek inside of the dynamic and what's going on. And I love learning about Zuko's mother. I think that's so interesting, and that tells us also, too, in the main narrative, a lot about Zuko.
Yeah.
We're already just talking about.
Mm-hmm. No, it's it's very just Game of Thronesy in the kind of
Yes,
which is hilarious because this is way before Game of Thrones started. But like that's just the like go-to comparison now whenever you have like people
royal
vying for a
family.
crown and like that kind of stuff and like throne and that kind of thing. But yeah, like I will always eat up political intrigue stuff like that. I think it's super interesting, and the show does it extremely well. It's wild that we just have a straight up like it's not a full coup because he's able to do it like on the low, and so it's just a like super subtle like him usurping the throne, and just like seamlessly doing that to be more ruthless. I do also think that it's interesting because I can't remember because I think there's another Fire Lord, and there's either one or two between Azulon and Sozin, like because it's been not at this point it'd be like what Zuko's 16 in present day, right? 16 or 17 in present day, so he's what like 10 or 11 in this flashback, maybe roughly younger.
Yeah,
I don't. I feel like, but between I'm so bad at guessing between
I'm
like
so bad at
6
that.
and 12. I have no idea. I'm like
it could be
that's
anything. Who knows?
That's why I just put it on. I'm like 10, maybe. I don't somewhere around there. So like we're what 80 years ish into this war, and Azulon looks pretty fucking old at this point. Like, dude,
I like that they show him with like he's old. He has the freckles. Like he's on his way out.
Yeah, like he's not. Which I think it does help Ozai in the fact that like is able to cover up what was definitely a murder. But
Somebody killed him. Don't know
so I can't remember if they say in the episode the Fire Lord before Azulon, which also side note, badass name. Great name.
Yeah.
Love that also we get like him being Azula's namesake. They both have such sick names, honestly. Like if you have a Z in your name, it's probably gonna be pretty cool. Like Zuko's got it too. I admittedly you're gonna fight me. Don't like Zuko's name as much. It's got like
I'm gonna fight you about that.
It's like
I gotta be somewhere. That's insane.
Okay, so we
Such
have word from producer Sean that it just straight up does go Sozin, Azulon, and then Ozai. So it's just those three. Which I mean, I guess tracks because Sozin probably lived to be pretty like old, and he's like
Sozin did live. Wow,
I mean, if he's there for like, if he's there, if he's doing the war for like 30 years roughly, and then we get Azulon doing it for like another 40.
Yeah,
but
and
like,
he was really old, so he's probably doing it for
like 40. That puts us like
and
that gives
still Ozai
I
is
guess
pretty
it's
old too. So
70 years, and then no, that tracks. That does track. But yeah, I think that it's super interesting seeing like one, it gives us more like concrete connection
like
and timelines
timeline.
where we can be like, okay,
Mhm.
it goes Sozin, Azulon, Ozai, and like you get to see that and kind of feel that. It also is just wild to think about. I love the contrast of knowing that the Fire Nation is in an active war
Mhm.
versus how relatively chill everything is. Like in which, like obviously, because it's the Fire Nation capital and like they're fine there.
Yeah, they're
But
safe.
just like that, like contrast between the fact that there's a it's not 100 years at this point, but like this war going on, but like they're just chilling at home and like playing
They're
in the
just chilling. It's
ponds.
just a thing that they do.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
oh, there just
They're
also
just
happens to be a war going on.
yeah. I do like
And
that we see Iroh as also this his bad side, his
yeah,
past.
like his
His,
letter is messed up, honestly.
yeah.
He's like,
He's like, oh, let me just burn it down, I guess.
yeah, he's like, provided we don't burn it down first. Like, all right, man, jam. Like,
And isn't it already at this point he's already met who do I want to say? Khan Ra? What's the spirit's names?
oh, has to have. Like, I
So
feel
it's
like
like I think somebody mentioned I forget where I read this, but they're like he's already met them at this point. But I think the death of his son Lu Ten
it
was
is what pushes him to be like not the
Mhm.
worst person.
like be like
Like,
maybe I shouldn't be doing
it
this.
kind of, I mean, yeah, it just like fundamentally shatters his worldview, which I also do. Again, like, this is another good example of the show tying back in and reinforcing themes and things that we already knew. And the fact that like we did know that he lost his son, but now we like are placing that specifically in time and specifically in relation to other things that are happening with characters. Like, and it's also very much no coincidence that like these dominoes fall in fast order where like you have Iroh losing his son, giving up on the siege of Ba Sing Se, and Ozai then being able to take power immediately after. Like,
Mhm.
those three things happening like are directly related to each other, and we see them happening in like a super short amount of time also.
Mhm.
Well, presumably we actually, I guess, don't really know exactly like how much time passes between like the first flashback that we see in this
Yeah.
episode and like Iroh
I mean,
writing
they're
them, and then like
relatively. I think it's like Zuko and Azula are still the same age,
yeah,
relatively.
it's definitely
And
like
kids grow
within
fast, so I'd say it's pretty
a couple months for
soon.
sure, if not weeks. I feel like the way that the show plays it, it's like days or weeks maybe.
Yeah.
So it's all like in a very condensed amount of time, but it's again just like rooting everything in a like, oh, now we concretely know like when this happened, and we're able to tie this to this other event that also happened this time, and like
Mhm.
that's able to like
We're
impact these
connecting the
characters.
dots.
Yeah, it's great. You get so much here, and just with the rough, I love all the Fire Nation politics, and
It's so
their
interesting.
culture and stuff is so fascinating to me.
And this is one of those things that we talked about a lot last episode, it being a kid show, quote
Mhm.
unquote, and it still being like leading into royal politics.
Yeah,
It's
and like
crazy. And how they double back.
backstabbing and murder, and like, because
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like they never straight up if you read it just at face value, like they very much like explicitly nothing on the like messy side of things happens. Like if you just
Mhm.
take what is said, but like it's very much not implied that that's what, or like
Yeah.
implied that that's not what happens,
Mhm.
which is wild to see. And again, we'll say it like every week, but in a Saturday morning cartoon, like it's like
Yeah.
we're getting like royal backstabbings and people taking the thrones from their brothers after their brother just lost their son in a siege. Like,
And also like Azula straight up saying things like, if this person dies, does that mean we ascend the throne? And I
yeah.
like her just straight up saying these things. I also love that that shows her having that understanding at such a young age, like
Hmm.
her understanding all like the political ins and outs, and but
Yeah,
her
like
also just
she
saying it out loud, and her mother being like, "You can't talk like that."
yeah, her mom
She's
being
like,
like,
"What's
what
wrong
the
with that
hell is
child?"
wrong with you? Like, what, how did I
Yes,
mess this one up so bad? Like,
I know.
um, but yeah,
But
I
isn't
love
it?
that. Huh?
Oh, this is okay. This is way, way, way in the future.
Hmm.
I'm getting really ahead of myself here. But isn't Zuko's dad not Ozai? Or am I thinking of something else?
No, he
Or was
is.
that a theory?
I think that might have been a theory, because I honestly straight up don't even know what you're talking about, if I'm being real.
Really?
Yeah, I might
Okay.
just be like blanking on something or missing something, but I don't think so. I feel like the show doesn't ever say that.
We'll get there, guys. We'll get there. We'll keep that in
Okay.
your pocket. We'll keep that
I'm
in
now
our pockets.
interested.
I
We've got
think
all right.
that could have been
Just a fan.
that could have been like a fan thing, something like, oh, what if this?
Interesting. Maybe it comes from some answers that we get in the comic.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. We'll get back to that, but I think that was
interesting
because that's why there's that difference between them, between Zuko and Azula.
But yeah, I do love that it shows that she very much has that like military, strategic, political mind from being like 10 years old. Because also, yeah, she's younger than Zuko. Like, is it 2 years between them? I think.
Yeah, so younger sibling. Having a younger sibling is like.
Yeah, they just are never like getting along. Aside from the fact that they're very just like in their nature different people, like they just do not like hanging out together at all. They're not. It's not a good time.
It's not a good time. I also love him as something that he says to comfort himself. It says Azula always lies. Azula always lies, and then he repeats it in the modern day, and he's
like Azula always lied, which again is one that's so good because that's doing so much for his character, but also her character, because it's straight up just like telling us stuff about Azula, like, hey, she's always lying about stuff, she's always manipulating people, like she's always doing things to her own ends, but then also just like reinforces the like straight up trauma that this kid has because his sister was the worst. like
a freaking Satan, the epitome of Satan.
Yeah, like she's awful, and he's like having to. It's straight up like a coping mechanism for him. It's how he's able to like ground himself and try to be like, no, it's fine, it'll be okay. Like she's the worst. She's just the worst. She's the worst. Like it's basically just what he's saying.
Don't listen to her. She's just doing it on purpose to get to you. And that's like, a lot of times growing up with the sibling, you're like, they just say that to get to you. They just say that to get to you. Just remember that.
Yeah. Like, so
obviously not to this extent, but.
This episode again though does what last week said. So we mentioned this last week, and the fact that these two episodes back to back do a lot to set up the future trajectory of especially this book, but the series as a whole, in the fact that last week we now have the clear path forward for the gang. We have his earthbending teacher. That's what they're going to be trying to do for the rest of the book, with some pit stops inside things because of course stuff gets in the way. But on the flip side, for our other main character, we now have Zuko's clear path, even though it might on the surface not seem like it as much, because like you could just read like, oh, he just had a little excursion to this town and didn't really do anything, just kind of messed things up, and now he's leaving again. But what this episode really does is it shows the fact that his path is, as you said earlier, the path to redemption and the path to being that good person that we as the audience now know and can see that he is and should be. And so it's opening him more up to going down that path and accepting those tendencies and realizing that he wants to or should be a better person. And so that really like very clearly sets his path up for the rest of this book and the series as a whole as well, which I think is super pivotal. And the fact that they give the audience that like 1-2 punch week after week with these two is like, so, and again, just being able to focus in on like it's just Zuko in this episode. Like we get Azula and May and Ty Lee, and who we've seen as other supporting characters, but they have like what 1, 2,
like a
it's
little
just
section.
one scene like that they're in. So it's and I mean the title says it. It's Zuko Alone. Like he just carries this episode.
Like we're focusing on Zuko now.
Like we don't see the Avatar in this episode at all.
No gang at all. This is the only episode where they're not seen at all.
It's which is wild. And so to have I think so, yeah.
I feel like I can say that confidently.
Yeah. I feel like there's no other episode where they're not going to have that, because even in the Tales of Ba Sing Se, right, there's still ones where like, so yeah, it's it's wild to be able to do that and like trust the character that you've built to carry that episode, where you're not having the title character in this episode is a really big risk. Honestly, like that's scary to do. And then not only that, to then make it one of the best episodes of the show. Like, I feel like it's always in the conversation when people are like, "Oh, what are the top episodes?" Like, I feel like without a doubt, this is at least top 10. Most people would probably argue top 5, and then like you could even make arguments for top 3. I don't know what I
like number 1.
I would need to
Except
look.
The finale. You have to say like the finale is always number 1.
Yeah, well, I would say. Oh, because their duel doesn't happen in the actual finale, does it? Or is that the episode before?
The episode before, I think.
Yeah, see, that's probably my number 1.
But
Like,
they're split, right?
I mean, yeah, it's like an
part one and
hour.
part two,
It's
so
like basically one episode.
it's a single episode.
So yeah, I mean, because that scene is just the best scene in the series. Like, hands down.
Yeah.
It's so, oh,
But it
it's so
works and it's good because of all of these
of
other
this,
things that
because
built
we're
it
able
up.
to like,
Because of this, because we're
yeah,
able to
spend the time with them
spend
and
time
really
with
get to
them.
like
Oh,
um
I just
see
I
them.
just love to seeing first of all, Zuko fighting without bending and
Hmm.
trying his hardest to hold out without it,
Hmm.
and then fully leaning into it. I love the animation around it. And I also love too, this is one of the only or first, I mean, we have a lot of heavy, dark episodes, but this is, I would say, one of the most. And we rarely, this is, I think, the longest we've gone without almost a comedic beat. So
Yeah, I
much
was
of
about to
the
say
show
there's
has comedic beats. I only noticed until he was at the fight and the guy watching made a comment. I was like, oh, it was almost jarring. I was like, oh, I haven't
yeah,
laughed the whole episode.
there's like no levity in this episode really. They're
No,
like, we're
I
gonna focus.
love
We're one, not gonna have the title character, and also no jokes. Get that shit out of here. Like,
it. Get that shit
it's
out of here.
it's just full on. Like, we're dropping nothing but heavy on this episode.
It's like
It's
we are building the we are building that narrative. We are bending the narrative in this episode.
incredible. Love to see it. Yeah, no, it's awesome. And again, I think that it's cool to your point about seeing him fighting without bending. I think that it is another interesting contrast between him and Azula in the fact that, like, I don't think that she would be good at fighting without her bending.
Oh.
I because like we never really see her do that. I mean, I think that she would be capable,
Mm,
but I don't think she would be really good.
I
Because
think
like,
I've seen her do some hand to hand. Well,
yeah, like I think
maybe
she could
some, but I don't think she could fully.
like she could hold her own. Like, she's not going to get her ass beat immediately, but like she's definitely not, like, if you take bending away from both of them, Zuko's clearing her easy. Like,
Really?
I think so, yeah. Because I mean, like, she's a bending prodigy, and I think that she definitely like focuses on that,
On
and
bending.
because she had that, she, I feel like, would look at putting more of an emphasis on hand-to-hand or weapon combat as like beneath her, and like, why would I focus on that when I'm a god? Essentially, like,
That's so true. That's
like
so true.
that she 100% would think of it as a lesser form of combat, and
Yeah.
a waste of her time. Like, why would I spend time honing that
Like
when
that's what her cronies are for. That's what Ty Lee and May are for.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that she is capable for sure, because you also like have to be able to fight some in general to like do the bending. But yeah, I definitely think that not nearly as skilled in that kind of, because I think that because Zuko
That's an
wasn't
interesting point.
as skilled with bending, he made an emphasis to make sure that he was able to do it without.
And using his broadswords. I do love too, he talks about when he explains the broadswords to Lee, he's talking about like they're two halves of a whole. You have to think of them as one.
Yeah.
And I feel like that relates back to Suki. She's like, think of the fan as an extension of your arm.
Yes.
And then I just love those little
talking about like combat and things like that in a like philosophical way is so cool.
Yes.
It's so great. Like, getting to the core of why it works and why some people like get it and are better, and how to actually like master it. And then it's not just a like swinging the sword around thing. It's like an understanding it as an extension or as whatever it is. Also,
like it's an art form.
Love his like sheath being on his waist now, as opposed to
yes, on his back, which is something he only reserves for Blue Spirit.
Yeah, I love it just being
good catch. Think about that.
Like, I noticed it whenever he goes to like put them back together and puts it in the sheath. I was like, oh, it's on your waist now. It's not on your back, which is just
I wonder if he does that too because this is kind of like a samurai-esque episode, and like I do love how he does the thing when he hits him first. He does this like typical samurai move.
Yeah, and he like
brings
just
the sword out and then just to hit him with it and puts it back in.
So good, such a good move.
I love it.
It's such a good. Yeah, we don't talk about it at like every episode anymore because we said it a while back. But like, there's only so many different ways we can say that the animation in the show is incredible. But like, the animation in the show is incredible, and yeah, that was definitely one of those moments when he like pulls it out and just like hits him with the pommel strike, and then like puts it back in. Like, all right, man.
And also just like, again, the choreography. It's so. Creative. It's just they're not like they're fighting. They hit. Like they do it in such a smart way.
Yeah.
That they get to show it's so smart that you see the character. Like, you have to be smart to show that your character is smart.
It's one doing that and like thinking about how the character would interact in this environment or versus whichever people. And then also it just makes each fight feel like they're bringing something new to the fight. Like every single fight in the show, you could be like, oh, well, like in this fight, this is when this happens. Like if you think about, I forget the episode title, but when you have like the animals fighting each other in the big like open field, when they're dealing with like the frogs or whatever, the like, you have the one lady, like the older
where
lady
they're
that,
sick. Yeah.
that like
Where
I
they're
wrote also
sick.
fights, but like you got the animal combat, or if you have like the pirates, like they bring something totally different to it, or like when you have the fight a few weeks ago with May and Ty Lee and like Katara, and like how that, like there's something from each of the fights where you can maybe be like, oh right, I remember this moment where the character did this other thing, or like the
and
first
that's
fight
new and different.
Yeah, like the fight on Kyoshi Island when you have the Kyoshi warriors fighting the Fire Nation guy, like that brings something different to it too. It's not like just now we're walking into standard, they fight and then the fight's over. Like
and it's such a good detail. I feel like too, in a lot of fighting shows, that's a big weakness. That's if you don't distinguish like
your
their
fights.
fighting style, you get lost. Everything gets lost. Everything.
And it also just becomes like boring and you get super disinterested because you're like, oh well, yeah, it's action, but like it's just whatever.
Just hitting
Like
each other.
I'm just watching them do like random things. Like it's not engaging in a way that it should be. And they do a great job of always grounding it in characters and choreography that makes sense with the characters. So yeah, that's always great. And then also like whenever I love that he just like wipes the floor with everyone at first, not using bending. But then whenever he like turns it up to that notch and uses bending, like it's not even close. He just absolutely.
It's not even close. He's like, I do too love that he does get his ass beat a little bit too. I like that he's not perfect. I do love, obviously we all love like an overpowered character. Toph.
It's always satisfying to see like people like your person that you're rooting for just like wreck people is always cool. But it's also nice to see him humbled a little bit.
Yeah. And he is like, Zuko's not perfect yet. Zuko is on his way to becoming perfect. I like that mirrors that as well. It's like he's not there yet. He's gonna get his ass beat, but when he does get there, we'll cheer because we're like, oh my god, he could do.
Because you saw those like struggles on the way there, which is crucial. Yeah, it's great. It's really fun stuff.
It's so good. I also love too something really cool in this episode that they do, which I think is, again, we've said a lot that this is a bold episode. That they show that people on the good side can be bad. Also, that they show these earthbending soldiers
and they're just
assholes.
Thugs. Yeah, they're terrible.
Thugs, which is crazy.
That's another. I mean, yeah, that ties into also like the war side of things and like occupation and like how the like power corrupting people, like they get a little bit of power over the people around them because they're like soldiers, and like how they're abusing that and misusing that, and that you can see that on both sides.
Which is crazy.
This whole episode actually, now that you bring it up in that light, really does show that like you can have bad people on the good side and good people on the bad side, with Zuko like being like, he should be the enemy, right? Like he's part of the Fire Nation, he's the prince of the Fire Nation, but in this episode
he's the good person. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's opposite, and it leans into that, I think, that like huge theme of this show, yin and yang, where it's like the good and the bad and the bad and the good. And I do like that Zuko is the good and the bad. Like that's kind of what his character is.
It's also I do think it's super important that by the episode's end as well, like they despise him, like they still like just like strictly because of who he is and not because of what he did, because like all he did was actually save them, like he was helping actually, but none of that matters to them because of who he is and what he represents, which kind of goes back to the theme of last week of like not letting your bias cloud your judgment about people. Like if they were able to get over that, they would see that like he's a good person actually, and he's trying, and he's on his way to being better. He's not there yet, obviously, but
it's like from Wreck-It Ralph. He's like, just because I'm a bad guy does not mean I'm a bad guy.
Yeah, that's good. That's such a good movie. I need to watch that movie again. It's been years.
It's a new podcast on Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah, but that's a good point that you do see the good and the bad on both sides, and they do. It's again just putting that nuance in there that like not everything is super clean cut and straightforward, which is cool. And
that
also,
it's not black and white.
His hair has grown out.
Also, this is top 10. Can we talk about Zuko's hair in this episode? This is top 10 Zuko hair.
He's getting there. It's great.
8-year-old me was watching this. I was like, oh my God, who is that? Why?
Yeah, it's grown back out after he cut the top off. Yeah. Looks all rugged. Head. It's just like going up. Yeah, the opening shot and the final shot are so good. The final shot is particularly incredible with that sunset in front of him. That's like,
and it's there's so much like weight to it too. It's like, there was no. The end of the episode, I'm so sad. I'm just so like, I don't know, melancholic. Is that a good word for it?
Yeah,
it's just heavy.
I mean, this whole episode just straight up feels like a Sergio Leone film.
Yes.
By way of Avatar. Like that's just what this episode is. And also they're able to pack so much lore into it. Like
so much lore.
I don't understand how.
One of those things we say, we're like, how is this only
20 minutes?
20 minutes, and I learned so much.
And I don't understand how they do this, and it doesn't feel rushed.
And it doesn't feel rushed.
How do you do that? Like none of the scenes feel rushed. The pacing doesn't feel rushed at all. I don't get it. How do you do this? Like,
it's a masterclass. It is a masterclass in storytelling.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this podcast. Because guys, that's fucking insane. That's amazing. That takes some serious skill. And that takes, I feel, a lot of sacrifice too from the writers, because there's so much too that they probably wanted to put in or do, but they're like, if it doesn't serve the story, if it doesn't get we just can't do it. We're only they were so strict on only things that service the story.
Yeah. And that comes down to from the very top conceptually of being like, we're doing an episode where we don't see the gang at all because we need to hammer down and focus on this and make this work. And everything is there for a reason and everything works super well.
We have to bend the narrative.
It's they do. They literally, they're like, this is the first time they're like, hey, we're taking a left turn. We're bending around here and focusing on them. Which is just, it's super impressive, and they pull it off in spades here. I hats off. I'm not wearing a hat, but Zuko could tip his hat to them.
Earbuds off for that.
Right.
But guys, so good. Love Zuko. If you guys didn't already know, I love Zuko. Anything else you would like to say last minute about this episode?
I don't think so. Just again, an incredible 1-2 punch with these 2 weeks of episodes of them really likes.
God, I think the two best episodes.
I think we talked about this when we started this book, that this season book one is fantastic already, of course. And then the first start of this season is also great, but really there's a point in book 2 when it just kicks to another level. It just doesn't.
This is legendary.
It starts with these two, honestly. I think you get the things where we get talk.
We're not playing around.
We have the full gang together. We have their goal. We have Zuko understanding his character fully, and we see where his trajectory and where he needs to go. And the show just does not let up from here on out. It's just insane. It's so good.
And it feels so rewarding too. As the viewer, I'm like, I feel like that's so rare to say with shows. The only other show I've said this with is Attack on Titan. Highly recommend if you've liked the show.
I've heard, from what I know, I would like it. Yeah.
It's so rewarding to the viewer. I feel like I kept it with it this long, and I just keep getting good little tidbits and more information about my favorite people. And it's so good. So I don't know if you guys know this. The show's so good.
So good.
So good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Bending the Narrative this week. Next week, things really start to ramp up in The Chase. But first, Alex, where can people find you online?
You can find me online at the Alex Batts. It's BATTS on both Twitter and Instagram.
And you can find me online at Kate the Official on Instagram.
Awesome. And please be sure to subscribe here to The Aspect on YouTube and any platform where podcasts can be found. Please give us a like, leave a comment, and turn on that notification bell. You can also follow us on Twitter /X, Instagram, and TikTok at The Aspect Co. Huge thank you to Peter Fraser for providing our series music, and thank you so much for listening.
And Flamio Hotman.
Hey, thank you for tuning in.
If you enjoyed this show, then be sure to subscribe here to The Aspect so you never miss an episode.
And be sure to check out some of our other shows and videos on the Aspect Network.
Thank you so much for listening, and Flamio Hotman.